Hello, everyone. This is Tony Lawson, CEO and co-founder of Shop Black. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Shawn Rochester, the CEO of the Minority Equality Opportunities Acquisition, Inc. How are you doing today, Shawn?
I'm doing great. Tony, how you doing?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me on the platform. Looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise, likewise. So let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to your current position as CEO of the current company.
Yeah, that's a long story that I'll try to make shorter, for our conversation. So I have a background in, mergers, acquisitions, right? Operations and strategy. I used to do M&A for a company called Amphenol, their IT and datacom business, on a global basis, which was terrific. Spent many years, traveling all over the world, looking for great acquisition targets and doing deals and, places all over Asia and Europe. Prior to that, I'd done, M&A at IBM, as well as, really was part of a really cool initiative that they had there a number of years ago called Emerging Business Opportunities, where they would find, areas within the marketplace that could support like $1 billion business, identify great managers, right, within the senior managers within the company, and provide them with the economic resources and the resources from within the company to kind of attack that space. Whether it's new product development or taking existing products and services into new places. So that was, really exciting to be a part of. Prior to that, did some work in manufacturing and operations, right, on the shop floor, really seeing leading teams in that respect. I'm a numbers person, right? So I have an MBA from Chicago and a chemical engineering degree from University of Rochester. And in addition to that, I've also spent time being a economic advocate, right? So as you know, I've written a book called The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America, where I quantify the economic cost of discrimination against Black people from the time of slavery up until the present. And I talk about an economic framework that's called PhD, which is about purchasing, hiring, and depositing in ways that create jobs, create and expand business, and provide capital in an affordable and available way, right? And in the Black community in particular, and other disenfranchised communities, in general. So it's all about what are the things that we can do to have a direct stimulative impact on job creation, business formation and expansion, and make sure that capital is available, right? And affordable in a community in general, and certainly within the business infrastructure within our community. So being a part of MEOA makes a lot of logical sense in terms of our, our mission and vision and purpose.
Got it. No, that's fantastic. And your current company is, would you describe it as a SPAC? And if so, could you, for those who are unfamiliar, explain what a SPAC is?
Yeah, so a SPAC is an acronym for special purpose, acquisition company. And what these companies essentially do is they raise capital on the public markets, and then they generally look for in the private markets to purchase a company. A couple of things will happen because of that business combination. One, the company will have access to the capital within the SPAC itself. And by virtue of doing a combination with a SPAC, that company now becomes publicly traded. So it will have access to raise capital in the public markets as well. And as you know, the primary challenges for minority businesses, enterprises in general, and certainly Black businesses in particular, is capital, right? Like items 1, I say, through 5 is having capital and then access to capital. So SPACs provide that in general for high growth companies, and we're applying that vehicle and looking at the minority business enterprise space.
Gotcha. And could you describe a high growth company?
It really is. A company with a strong team, right? A strong market position. It's got, from our perspective, already existing steady revenue and cash flow with a plan and a strategy to dramatically increase in size, whether it's investing in product development, entering new markets globally, so on and so forth. But you need the capital and the resources to be able to drive that transformation, right?
Right.
So it's the desire to expand, right, rapidly, a plan to execute it, the team that's in place, but then you need the capital and also the resources, expertise that the management team associated with the SPAC,
Mhm.
can bring to you.
Got it. And what do your ideal acquisitions, what do they look like presently? What's your criteria at the moment?
So we're looking for MBEs, so Black enterprise, Hispanic enterprise, Asian enterprise, American Native American enterprise. That's within the MBE ecosystem,
Mhm.
right? Um, we are industry and sector agnostic, so we're looking across industry and sector, right? So we can have the aperture as wide as possible to find like the best opportunity. So whether that's you know um, automotive or industrial, fintech, right? The food, processing, manufacturing, distribution, or travel, logistics, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
Government procurement. We're looking across the spectrum, which is great. But in terms of individual companies, for us, it's again, just to reiterate the quality of the team, right? The position in terms of where they are in the market,
Mhm.
a desire to be publicly traded, right?
Right.
Because that's a different level of reporting, that goes along with that, and that generally is looking to fuel aggressive growth.
And are there any revenue requirements to be for the acquisition?
Yeah, so great question. So we look at it in terms of like enterprise value range,
Mhm.
right? Which is like the value of the company. So we're looking for really large, like MBEs, right? You can think of them as like that first tier
Mhm.
of them. So between, let's say, 250 million and 500 million, right? So large MBEs.
Gotcha. So, us being Shop Black, our focus is on black owned companies.
Mhm.
And I guess in the when it comes to the word, minority, sometimes obviously it includes other minorities like, Hispanic and others there. What would you say that it takes what would you say it would take for more Black owned businesses to reach the position that where they would be an ideal candidate for acquisition, where they have that, whether it's 250 million, they're in that $250 million range. Is it joint ventures? Is it doing more mergers? Is it creating tech that results in acquisitions from larger entities? How can we position ourselves to have more of these high growth companies?
So that's a great question, right? So let me repeat it to make sure I'm answering it properly, right? So how do we ensure that you have more, Black enterprise in that size, right, range? Like, what are the things that are necessary to do that?
Yep.
And I think that requires a comprehensive approach, right? So, a SPAC structure is one way to address the existing companies, right, of that size. So we need to have things that go from grant capital. We need to have non-dilutive capital for founders who are just starting out. And we're dealing with the resource gap between Black families and kind of non-Black families, right? So if you look at their white peers, they're starting out with like, I think the number's like closer to, there's a $72,000 gap in
Mm.
terms of like, founder capital just from yourself, friends and families.
Right.
So we need startup capital, really grant non-dilutive resources that go in just to seeding that. And we need to be going into seeding tens of thousands of those, right? Because it's from that tranche that you're going to start to see the ones that are going to get, more friends and family and angel, and then start to get into Series A, right? You got to have a wide funnel. And we got a big problem there, as you know, from being in this space. We got a lot of brilliant people. We got a lot of people with terrific experience, right? But you don't have access to the capital to really bring these ideas to
Right.
fruition and bring on board other people, right? Who also, can help bring it about. So I think that's one really, important piece of it.
It is.
This the second, and I mean that at scale, right? So billions, not the small numbers that people tend to talk about, here. Then you need, more, Black led, VCs and private equity firms, right? So that And in part, so this is going to take me back to why is it important to have more of that, right? So in that book that I talked about called the Black Tax, right, that I wrote about this stuff, it's really looking at the economic cost of anti-Black discrimination. So, and that can come from conscious activities or unconscious activities, right? So there's some really negative biases associated with Black people in general, and that translates to Black founders, right? And Black entrepreneurs in terms of perceptions about products and services, right? And the like. And you have some cultural disconnects in place. When you have more of us in those places, you have less of that discriminatory friction that's going to be reducing the commercial flow, right, of resources. So you certainly need much more capital in the hands of Black, capital providers, right? And more of us on the teams of kind of non-Black, VCs and private equity firms that are out there. And so you don't have as much, not just the discriminatory part of it, which by the way, can be intentional or subconscious, and also the kind of cultural disconnects, right? There's some really, critical ideas that are out there that would work very well within, a Black or minority context. And sometimes it's harder for people to see who are not kind of the community in the space.
Sorry, not to cut you off. Could you go into a little bit about the cultural disconnects and what those might be? Some examples?
Yeah, I think, like, let me give you an example of something that's been enormously successful, right? But I'm sure they went through a really tough time in terms of raising all the capital that they need. There is a software infrastructure that was put in place to be able to help barbershops, right? I think they now have like a valuation that's like $700+ billion. You know what I mean? Right. So it may be difficult for people to understand what the opportunity with that was if you don't know how critical kind of like the barbershop infrastructure is within the Black community, right? I mean, it's a place of, camaraderie and discussion and elevation and argumentation and a whole host of things that happen there, right? Fathers bring their sons for their first haircut, and this whole community is part of our infrastructure, right? And it's recession proof. You're gonna make sure you look nice regardless. Yeah. But the applications to help the effectiveness, right, of those shops across the whole country might be easy for someone to miss because they don't know about how central it is for 45 million people, right, touching 17 million families and the like. So you can have a cultural disconnect, right, because you just don't see it, because to know is to experience, right? And if you haven't experienced that, then it's hard for you to know it. Right. And then there are other examples of things like that can come up that I'm sure we've all been a part of. And I hate to kind of go on and on about this, but your question requires a multi-month symposium, right? Because it's about building this really critical infrastructure that's not actually in place. So we have to have more of us present in the allocation of capital for the reasons that we kind of talked about, whether you're part of the leadership team or you are the capital provider, right, yourself. And then we have to have more, resources available at each level, right? Because there are many teams that are out there working on great projects, and they're trying to raise $1, $2, $3 million to get it underway, and it's extremely difficult. So if they can't raise that money, they don't get to be a $50 million business. So we can't start even talking about a $200 million business, right? So at every stage along this continuum, we need to make sure that you have the right capital that's in place. Then once you have those types of things, we can wrap the technical support around it, right? The mentoring, the relationships, the contracts, the connections, right? With, consumers of these products and services, and incremental resources to help proper allocation of the capital, right? But you have to have it there, in place. And then in terms of like private equity funds, the gap is so large. And while we have to ensure that we have the requisite capital there for business, formation and growth, that's, we're not going to grow our way out of this process, right? We have to acquire businesses that are already well positioned with strong teams and connections and infrastructure, and the like, and to be able to do that at scale. right? So it's really, really, critical. And part of what we're trying to do, at least from this perspective of this kind of the SPAC marketplace, is really help people to see that there's value in companies and teams where they didn't perceive value before. Right. And to get other, capital providers and sponsors excited about moving into this space. It's much more than just, what we're doing. And our goal is to be, very successful. Right. But it's bigger than that.
Right. No, well said. Speaking of Black banks, are you working with any? And if so, what is their level of involvement?
Yeah. So thank you for that question. So, SPACs are going to have two accounts, right? They're going to have a trust account, which is the money that's raised at the IPO, and then they're going to have an operating account, right? You kind of have to fund the business from up to the IPO, and then from the IPO to the business combination, which is what they kind of call the de-SPAC. So we opened an account with Industrial Bank, right, in DC. So our operating account is with a Black bank. Okay. And of the many, many hundreds of SPACs in the entire multi-decade history of SPACs, to our knowledge, we're the only, special purpose acquisition company that's opened an account, right, with a Black bank. And again, that's something else that we want to show people is a critical thing to do. Right. Now there are 400 to 500 SPACs out there with $180 billion that they raised. Right. And then, a portion of that is the working capital that they're going to need until they find the acquisition target. Right. And those resources certainly could be within, Black banks for that duration. That would be a huge lift, right, to them.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong. So for a SPAC, so SPACs have, is it 2 years to acquire a company after they've raised the total amount that they want to raise? And how much are you raising? And obviously, don't go into anything that that you shouldn't be mentioning, but do you have like certain, I guess, areas that you have targeted sectors, or how much can you go into what your, I guess, future plans are once the 125 has been raised?
Yeah, so SPACs typically have around 24 months, right, to find like a great target and to do like a business, combination associated with that, right? Ours is roughly fully extended about 21 months, so we're for our process. We went into the roadshow and with a target of raising $100 million. We received strong response from the market, which we greatly appreciate. So we raised that target to 110, and then we oversubscribed on top of that, right, by another 15, and that brought us to 126.5 million, right, that we raised. So really excited about that. Happy that the market agrees with and values, right, what we're trying to do, on many levels, and demonstrated that by putting capital in place. So we're really excited, about that. And in terms, as I said, we're industry sector agnostic, but we are aware, obviously, of, industries and sectors where you tend to have a higher concentration of larger, MBEs, right, and Black enterprise, and certainly where you see augmented demand, right, for them. So we're very aware of that.
Okay. All right. Good answer. So apart from the obvious question, like about what you hope to, achieve with the company in the next, obviously, 21 months, what's your overall, like your personal goal? What do you hope to achieve with the organization?
Yeah, again, it's really getting folks to look deeply at this space. Like, why is that? So let's just kind of talk about that a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Again, remember, I talked about hundreds of SPACs that are currently looking for targets, right? And collectively, they've raised somewhere around 180 or so billion dollars at IPO, and they're going to acquire companies that are multiples of that, right? But there's only one other that we can point to with a stated interest in our space. So it's almost completely ignored by the entire industry, right? And then MBEs are challenged because they're largely ignored by the capital markets in general, right? They're not, participating, and it's very difficult for them to get the capital that they need. So part of it, again, is getting more people to see, based on us doing a great job, that there's value here, right? So that those who want to impact change can say, listen, this is one way for us to do it. And those who are just interested in profit maximizing can say, this is another way for us to do it, right? And that's really, important. It's important to get capital to the right teams who need that capital to deploy it to drive the growth, right? And their strategies to take themselves into the next level, right, of performance. But it's more important than that. It's to get a multiplier effect on the level of capital coming in there, right? Because, we'll be looking at ultimately doing some type of transaction with a company, right? Or maybe, more than one, if the right set of circumstances presented itself.
Right.
But, we want to have an impact that's bigger than just that, right? So we need to have more people, in this space. And that's really important to build. We can't have the thriving communities that we all want, right, and desire and need, if we don't have a really strong business infrastructure, right, that's well capitalized.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And I guess in wrapping up, I wanted to touch on your book really quickly, if we could. Like, what was what inspired you to write it? And what has their response been since it's been published?
Yeah, the inspiration was a couple things. One, it went back to years ago where I would see, every 6 months or so. Well, now it's happening much more frequently. But you see reports, an article about a report that was done that talked about discrimination in some really important area, right, whether housing or the like. And I would see those, and it always felt like attacks to me, right? And I always told myself, at some point I'm going to go back and kind of aggregate these things. But what I really was trying to do was to make the strongest case possible for commercializing Black enterprise, right? Whether it's us as individuals, we tend to be biased against our own businesses, right? We're concerned about quality and the like, or we might approach it from a charitable perspective. I'll help you out and all that kind of stuff. What that's implying, like, there's a cost to it. So I was like, if you think of it as a cost, let me show you what the cost of what's happening now is, right? And at the end of the day, we need to focus on economic solutions. So I just started to look at what these costs were in a present context in markets and areas that are really critical to wealth accumulation for Black people. So that's housing, automotive, insurance, finance, online commerce, job search, high-end careers, capital raising for businesses, and the like. And then I did a look back from the time of slavery up until the present, and just kind of quantify these massive discriminatory practices that have been in place, right, for many, many decades. And when you start to look at it from a quantitative perspective, it has a transformative impact, right? Because we can disagree about whether or not you think slavery was a long time ago or it was a big deal. Because if you think it's a long time ago and you don't think it was a big deal, the implications, you think it was a small matter, right? But we can go back and look at what researchers say was the quantification of labor extracted from millions of people over a quarter of a millennia. It's a really big number, right? So that kind of settles that discussion, right? And you can look at Jim Crow, you can look at the New Deal, you can look at all these kind of different things. Then it starts to become clearer as to how is it that, Black people could be here for 400 years, but only owned about 2% of US wealth. And if you don't understand the historical context, and if you don't understand the present context, you're going to assume it's decisions that Black people are making as a community or not making that's led to that. And if you think that's the case, where's the compassion, right? Where's the investment? Where's the personal desire to help people who you think are doing it to themselves, right? But once you get an idea of the context, the size, the scope, and that it was, it was elegant in design and nefarious in impact, right? Like, if you drop other people into that, you're not going to get a better outcome. You're not going to get a different outcome, right? And it helps to separate the individual from the environment in which the individual is operating and a context behind it. And then people start to think about, well, what can we do? And part of what we do is applying an economic framework in terms of taking actions that have a direct stimulative impact on job creation, business formation and expansion, and capital availability and affordability, right, within the Black community. And whether you're at a government or a corporation or some other institution, you can create policies, plans, and programs that have those direct stimulative impacts, right?
Right.
And that's what was, the writing of the book was based on. The responses have been enormously positive, right? Like, sales have been great. It's groundbreaking, transformative, just superlative descriptions from people who read it, from the CEOs to the diplomat to the layperson on the street, right? It's unique in the approach, right, and the impact.
Right. Yeah. So tell us again, what is it? I'm going to go get my copy. Remind us again what the name is and where the book can be found.
Yeah. So it's called The Black Tax: The Cost of Being Black in America. And it can be found, at Amazon, on Audible. And you can get it from our website, which is www.blacktaxed.com. But however you like to consume it, it's available on that platform. If you're an audiobook person, I'm a big audiobook person, it's there. If you like your Kindle reader, it's there. If you want to hold a physical book, it's there.
That's great. That's great. Well, Shawn, thanks for taking the time to chat and explain what's going on. I'm expecting some really great things on your end. That's what you know how to do. So I'm excited about what you have going on, and best of luck.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, on your platform, and for allowing us to, engage with the wider audience. We got some exciting times ahead of us.
Of course. Well, I hope to hear from you soon, and you have a great rest of the day.
You too.
All right, take care.